Hello, welcome to our lunch break study. It is Wednesday, March 9th, 2022, and we're going to pick up our conversation from last week's session about the establishment of American Jewish movements. We talked last week about the Trafa Banquet and the Pittsburgh Platform. And today, what I was going to do is very quickly follow up with where the Reform movement they rewrote their platform in 1937, and I wanted to take a look at that. And then after, I want to introduce you to Rabbi Sherwin Wein, and we're going to look at a video of his, and we'll hear from him, and we will take a look at his work called Judaism Without God. And I have some texts for that. He was the founder of Humanistic Judaism. And as we talked last week about sort of the reactions to German Reform movement, what is interesting about Rabbi Wein, of which I believe Rabbi Averbach is a student, so she will have, I hope, personal experiences to share with us. Not to put you on the spot, of course not, Rabbi. But I think discussing this on the heels of where the Reform movement finds itself, because Rabbi Wein came out and is a reaction to the Reform movement. So the first thing that I want to take a look at here is, hold on one second, is what is called the Columbus Platform. Okay, so the Columbus Platform is 1937. It is an update of the, I'll put the link in the chat for those who want it. It is an update of the Pittsburgh Platform. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I want you to understand sort of where Rabbi Wein is coming from. So here is, and he was ordained in the Reform movement. So the guiding principles of Reform Judaism, you can remember where we were 50 years back at the Pittsburgh Platform. We can see the updates, note 37, note that year. In view of the changes that have taken place in the modern world, interesting, and the consequent need of stating anew the teachings of Reform Judaism, the CCAR makes the following declaration of principles. It presents them not as a fixed creed, but as a guide for the progressive elements of Jewry. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I want you to see it. Nature of Judaism. Judaism is the historical religious experience of the Jewish people. Though growing out of Jewish life, its message is universal, aiming at the union and perfection of mankind under the sovereignty of God. Reform Judaism recognizes the principle of progressive development in religion and consciously applies this principle to spiritual as well as to cultural and social life. Judaism welcomes all truth, whether written in the pages of scripture or deciphered from the records of nature. The new discoveries of science, while replacing the older scientific views underlying our sacred literature, do not conflict with the essential spirit of religion, as manifested in the consecration of man's will, heart, and mind to the service of God and humanity. Number two, which is the one I want to focus in on today, because this is going to be the one that Rabbi Wein is going to react to, is God. The heart of Judaism and its chief contribution to religion is the doctrine of the one living God who rules the world through law and love. In him, all existence has its creative source and mankind its ideal of conduct. Though transcending time and space, he is the indwelling presence of the world. We worship him as the Lord of the universe and as our merciful Father. Okay, so that's the Reform movement in 37. Thoughts? Ben is cool with it. Ben is like, that sounds like good conservative Judaism. Susan?
Well, there's another Pittsburgh Platform that's very recent from the Reform.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't. Well, that I think is a response to Rabbi Wein. I think I'm trying to work this way through history because Rabbi Wein comes in between those two statements. So this, I believe, is 37. Rabbi Wein starts his movement in 60, starts his synagogue in 62, his movement in 63. So this is really in response to the very theistic statement of the conservative, the Reform movement. And so let me show you Rabbi Wein. Let's go. Let's hear from him. And he will tell you exactly about this experience. The first clip, I have a lot of clips here. I'm not going to show you all of them. I want you to note that the clip is going to be dark. So I don't care how much you light up your screen, it's still going to look slightly dark. It's not you, it's the video. The first clip is going to be 5 minutes. It's an interview that he has, and he's going to give you a little bit of his background and then lead into the philosophy of the movement. And I'm not going to play the whole interview for you, but he's very pithy. I'm sure Rabbi Auerbach will tell us that he has a good talent for pith. So we will not be, this might be the longest clip of him that we will see. So let me share that here. Oh, sorry. I want to optimize for sound and video. Okay.
I am talking today with the founder of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, Rabbi Sherwin Wein. Rabbi Wein completed his rabbinical training at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. He was a U.S. Army chaplain in Korea, founded Temple Beth El in Windsor, Ontario, and the Birmingham Temple in Farmington Hills, Michigan, the first congregation of humanistic Judaism in 1963. In 1969, he founded the Society for Humanistic Judaism and has since helped start national and international organizations related to humanistic Judaism. Rabbi Wein has written widely, including controversial works such as Humanistic Judaism and Judaism Beyond God. His latest work is Staying Sane in a Crazy World, A Guide to Rational Living. Rabbi Wein, I think an appropriate way to start our conversation is to ask the question, why is this rabbi different than all other rabbis? Given your background as a chaplain in Korea and your rabbinical training, you might have followed a more standard path for rabbis. What was it that motivated you to start a new branch of Judaism?
Well, I wanted to do two things. One, I wanted to have my own integrity within the framework of Judaism and the rabbinate. And two, I wanted to really be useful to people who needed a new approach to Judaism. So the two coincided, my convictions and what I perceived to be the need. I was trained as a Reform rabbi. I entered the Reform rabbinate because I thought I could do humanistic Judaism within the framework of the Reform rabbinate. And when I discovered that I couldn't, I realized that instead of sitting in intellectual and emotional pain, that I should simply go and organize something new. So I helped to found in 1963 the Birmingham Temple, and what I tried to do was to listen to myself, and what I was basically was a cultural and humanistic Jew, and I knew a lot of people out there who were in the same boat and who had no place in the Jewish world. And so the community that I helped to create was the beginning of a process of reaching out to those people.
What was it that caused you to conceive humanistic Judaism?
Well, I think I've always been a humanistic Jew. I've always had a very, very intense connection to my Jewish identity. It's always very important to me. I always wanted to make my profession, my life's work, something that built around Jewish identity and helped people reinforce their Jewish identity. I also was very interested in philosophy. And so the closest to what I wanted to be and do at that time when I was planning my career was the Reform rabbinate. And I tried that for 7 years. And in my 6th year, it came to me. I'd have to organize a community that was built explicitly around humanistic Judaism. And that was somewhere around 1962. But the ideas had been gelling in my mind for a long time, I would say for a period of 5 to 6 years.
What makes humanistic Judaism unique is that it is non-theistic. I wonder if you could expand on the meaning of being non-theistic as a religion.
Yes, I think the basic question of all religion and the basic question of all philosophies of life is, where do I find the power to deal with all the problems of my life? And the answer that came traditionally in Judaism was that that power came from out there. It came from a supernatural source that was identified as God. And we're non-theistic in the sense that we answer the question not by denying God. We have no reliable information as to whether there is or is not God. What we do know is that we as human beings have a lot of power that we fail to recognize. So for us, the source of power that enabled the Jewish people to survive, the source of power that enables human beings to deal with their problems, the source of power that we need to develop is our own power, not only individually, but within the context of a human community.
Did you coin the word agnostic?
He didn't. So I'm going to stop that question. What do we think of Rabbi Ain? So we know that the 37 statement that we just read, the Columbus platform, that's the school he went to. That is the POV of the ordination that he received. And he says 5-6 years into his work as a Reform rabbi, he just could not be the humanistic rabbi he felt in the Reform movement, and felt he needed to start his own movement. Marv.
You know, you wonder how far you can bend the rubber band before it snaps. Now, to a non-thinking Jew like me, I don't have any trouble accommodating to an entity that I go into under a Jewish umbrella. Well, I don't think I'd be comfortable in an Orthodox synagogue, but I mean, in the conservative synagogue I go to, I think what I want, and I read the texts and I accept what I want. I do exist like most people at times in my life. I feel very alone. You know, it's this existential crisis of the human being against the chaos. And so I imagine I like to be under some protective umbrella. So I'm in a religious entity. But it's just remarkable how we've had so many thousands of years of Judaism. It expands and encompasses so much, and we're here. And I like to listen to these things and go my own way.
I'm muted there. So you're not, because there's another line I'm going to go to, but I wasn't going to hang on there. So I don't have to stop there. But one of the things he says here is, and maybe I will show it, is that he wanted to be a Jew with integrity. And what you're saying is you see no such conflict with your relationship with the synagogue that he sees. And if you want, I can pull up that clip for you that we can take a look at, although I seem to have shut my Sherwin-Wine. Susan, why don't you speak at the moment, and then I will pull up the clip, because I see you have your hand.
Yeah, I don't think Sherwin-Wine believes that everybody should be a humanistic Jew. I mean, I think that's really important.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly long email from your boss that you have to finish
Sorry,
before the meeting starts in 10 minutes.
For him personally, and for the congregants at Birmingham Temple, it was a very small number of people who felt the way he did as well. They felt that their integrity, for them to say the words about a king of the universe or whatever, there are quite a few survivors. There are quite a few people who were active in the early movement who were survivors, and they were not going to pray to a God that was all powerful who let their families be killed in Europe. It was just done for them.
That's perfectly stated. No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
So I personally would not be here today at this lunch if it hadn't been for Sherwin-Wine. I left Judaism completely when I was 18. I was done. And when I went to my cousin's wedding in Ann Arbor, and Sherwin-Wine was the rabbi officiating, and my mother said that rabbi is an atheist, although I don't think he was really an agnostic, as he would call it. I thought, ooh, and I read his book, and it led me to where I am today. I mean, I led a community in the East Bay. I became a rabbi at the Institute. He was my teacher. He invited me to become a rabbi in this movement. But if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't be there. And hundreds of people across the world who are part of this movement, including in Israel, would not be active in any Jewish way. Because
So here, I think that's beautiful, Rabbi Susan. I'll call you Susan because you asked me to call you Susan. That's beautiful. And here is exactly that point. Here he expresses it here. This point I was making.
Have come from intellectual backgrounds. We have people in our movement who've come from business and working backgrounds. I think what unites them all is the fact that they want to be Jewish and they want to have their integrity, and that they want to be able to say and do the things that are honest. They want to be Jewishly honest. That's what unites them all.
Do you?
So there you go. So that there is that sense of being Jewishly honest, living a life with integrity, not, and in his book, which we'll look at, Judaism Beyond God, not be passive or accept sort of going through the motions for something that feels as lacking in integrity. Thoughts on that? Yes, go Hope. You're muted, Hope. Just unmute yourself. That's okay.
Less to argue with if I'm muted. So first of all, I'm offended at the use of the word rabbi. To me, rabbi implies religion. As I understand what's being said, it's Jewish culturally, which I totally buy into and I love and I appreciate. But let's call it a really solid community based on the principles of Judaism. The second part, and again, I'm sorry, I am offended by this, is his saying, my own integrity. You don't build a community based on one's own integrity. To me, that's probably pretentious is the best word. I believe there are a set of ethics that apply to the world, and that there's a set of Jewish ethics that is a subset of that. And I don't think you can call yourself Jewish and then say, but I danced to my own drummer. So
Okay,
now I'll go back on mute.
No, that's good. Well, the one thing we've learned, Hope, in this world is you can call yourself Jewish and do anything. So that's the first thing that you can do. That is kind of that's part of just the society.
But can you call yourself a rabbi?
In which we live. So all right, so that you're making two key points here. They're your value judgments, and the only thing is politeness. The first point is that religion, and by the way, that's the next exact point in the interview that he goes through, and I wasn't going to play it, but he goes through two types of religion. Theistic religion and cultural religion is how he expresses it. And he believes, you wouldn't agree, but he believes that there is a cultural religion that can be expressed through culture that doesn't require theism. And then your second point is that he shouldn't be able to refer to himself as a rabbi. Maybe you view that as cultural appropriation, perhaps, or something that is using a term. To use Marv's expression, you're bending it past the point, the term of rabbi past the point where perhaps it breaks. Okay, Susan.
Well,
and you should not feel, Susan, you should not feel as if you have to defend. I don't want you to do that. I will do all of that. I have plenty of the material to cover.
No, but I just want to point out that I was raised Orthodox, and believe me, there were Orthodox rabbis who would have said the same about conservative rabbis, yes, and the same about Reform rabbis. And there were Orthodox rabbis who would say the same about Hasidic rabbis who they thought were not legitimately rabbis because they didn't agree with their point of view. This is a never ending, that's a place not to go, in my opinion, because
that's because I think at some point it becomes reductio ad absurdum. As my rabbi, Rabbi Morty Waxman, used to say, that person is now firmer than God. You'll always find someone firmer than God. And I think that that's a good way to put it. Yeah, go right ahead, Hope.
So I do want to distinguish, is my question of the use of Wine's use of the term rabbi is not based on fromness or level of observance or what he is committed to or believes. I'm looking at it in the
Etymology. You're looking at the etymology of the word.
I couldn't find the word.
No,
Yes.
I got you. I understand. No, of course. Marv.
Yeah.
We're talking about integrity. So if you attend a conservative synagogue, but you are unsure as to whether God exists or not, it would be wrong to attend a conservative synagogue because you have to believe that God exists. I mean, I go to synagogue with great doubts about the world, about the existence of a God. So my attendance at a conservative synagogue indicates a lack of integrity on my part. Is that what we're
So I don't
sold?
think Rabbi Wein would say, Rabbi Wein would say for you, that is not the concern. I think he would say for him, the issue is one of integrity, but that you are a different person, uniquely different, to make the question of integrity for yourself. I don't hear in Rabbi Wein any of those value judgments coming through any of his work. I do hear we will get to some value judgments with regard to the old text, though. Ben.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with, humanistic rabbi. Rabbi just means teacher, right? I don't think there's any assumption about how they should be teaching. But I don't know, I was wondering what humanistic Jews actually do. I was looking at the humanistic Jew website, right? It looks like they do all the same stuff, right? There's Shabbat and there's all the holidays and there's, right? So, but what occurred to me is looking at the way that the humanistic Judaism presents itself, there just seems to be an enormous effort to make sense of everything that we do as Jews. I was just reading through and it's like, this symbolizes this, and this is about this, and this is the meaning of this.
All right, well, don't read, stop reading. Don't read in the middle.
I'm not reading.
No more reading. So here, let's go right to it. And here, so this is going to pick up on the two questions. This is going to pick up on the two questions that were just asked and discussed. The first one, you see this Sherwin-Wine video here? Just say yes, because I've lost all perspective.
Yeah, we can see it. It's yeah.
Okay.
Now you've maximized your chat window.
Okay, you've got this window now. Okay, great. So the 2 points that he's going to get into here, I'm going to let this run for about 4 or 5 minutes. I was going to divide it in two, but I'm going to let it run because it addresses both points that were just raised. The first point he's going to address is the legitimate criticism by Hope, which I believe is legitimate because of where he says the root of his movement comes from. And then the second part he's going to get into, well, what about the prophets? What does he think about the prophets? And then finally, which is the point I highlight to show, which is what do humanistic Jews actually do to answer Ben's questions? So this is going to run for about 5 minutes, but he's going to begin what I think is particularly interesting. Troubling is not the right word. It's just perhaps if you want to make the quote that it's not authentically Jewish, he's asked point blank the question of where his values come from, and listen to his answer.
Okay. Well, humanism as an articulated philosophy did not begin with the Jews. The first people to articulate humanism as a philosophy were Greeks who lived in Athens and other places in the Greek world. And they formally articulated those ideas, Democritus, Epicurus, and so forth. So it wasn't Jews who articulated the ideas. For me, the powerful connection of Judaism and the Jewish experience with humanism lies in what's happened to the Jewish people. That is, if you look at Jewish history over the last 2,000 years, the last conclusion you would come to is that we live in a world governed by a loving and just providence. In fact, the message of Jewish history, certainly dramatized by the Holocaust of this century, is that we live in a world in which whatever forces there are out there do not care about a moral agenda. And they don't care whether we live or we die. In the end, the responsibility for our lives comes from us. And the power for our survival and for justice in the world has to come from us. And Jewish history, in my eyes, in a very, very dramatic way, exemplifies that message. So, the humanism of the Jewish people doesn't come from the articulated philosophy. It comes from the experience, and to me, in some ways, that's more powerful.
Then how would you characterize the early?
Okay, so that's slightly problematic for a rabbi. He is grounding his belief in Greek philosophy, admittedly, and in the human experience of the Jew and in the Jewish experience writ large, which he will say that experience is more significant. The history, Jewish history, is more significant than any particular text. Anyway, I just thought that stood out for me as I was trying to think through, humanistic Judaism. I like humanism. I like humans. I think humanism is missing in a lot of our world today. I think we've become very concerned with statistics and technology and less concerned with humans. So I find a lot of this very compelling. But that is one thing that just was flashing light, a movement founded on the Greeks. Don.
Yeah, he mentioned that given our history, a loving and just God wouldn't have allowed that, or something like that.
Well, so he's making a value judgment. Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, to me, that's a big value judgment. Like he doesn't believe in God, or he's an agnostic, and yet he's going to say that this is what God would have done.
Post-Holocaust, Don, you have to understand this is in the shadow of the Holocaust. So the idea that there is a loving, compassionate God who is going to look after us and guide us through history is going to be particularly hard to stomach at this moment in history.
Depending on what your definition of a loving and just God is. Okay, that's once again blaming God, putting it on God. If you die, it's God's fault. If you can't pay your rent, it's God's fault. If something goes wrong in your life,
so a part of you agrees with him, but then a part of you does agree with him, because what you're saying is you can't put this stuff on God, and Rabbi Ain agrees with you. You can't put this stuff on God. In fact, that's a large critique that he has with other branches of Judaism. There's an outsourcing of responsibility to God. So you agree with him in that sense.
In that sense, but I'd also say God is also with us. And that in the end, it will be how God works it out in the long run. And two other little questions. Was Rabbi Ain, when he was reformed, did he believe in God then and then have some kind of a transformation? She'll answer that. And
let's go to one of his students, Susan.
Yeah.
Actually, he told us a story about his training as a Reform rabbi. He said that he and at least 90% of the other students he studied with in Cincinnati did not believe in God. They just didn't. And in fact, even their Jewish practice was really, he was shocked. He went home to New York. He was from Michigan, but he went with one of the students for Seder in New York, and the mother of the student was really upset that her son was becoming a rabbi. But they were very wealthy. The servant came out with the main course. This is for a Seder, and it's a giant ham. And Schoenwein, who was brought up fairly, he was brought up in the conservative to Orthodox, that was really shocking to him. But actually, 90% of the students in Reform Seminary when he was there did not believe in God. But I wanted to do, the reason my hand was up.
No, can I just stop you on that point? I think that, first of all, I can say the same from the JTS when I was there. Okay, those numbers hold up. Okay, unequivocally. And also, what's interesting about Rabbi Wein, that I failed to appreciate before your comment, is that people like you who grew up conservative or who grew up Orthodox would not feel at home in Reform.
Right.
Which is interesting, which is like, so if they weren't Orthodox and they couldn't stomach some of the orthodoxies of halachic life, to go to Reform, they'd end up with a ham on their Seder plate, which just wouldn't fit their sensibilities. So Reform in that sense truly wasn't an option. Okay, now your next point.
But my point about the Greeks, the rabbis were, in my rabbinic training, we had to study.
I don't love Maimonides either. I don't love Rambam.
We studied a lot. Anyway, Talmud, everything. It's very rigorous because they're very sensitive. The people who've organized the Institute are sensitive about critics from other branches of Judaism. But there's a wonderful quote from Ben Zoma, and you know what it's going to be, from Pirkei Avot. Who is wise? He who learns from every man, as it is said, from all who taught me have I gained understanding. That is in our rabbinic
Amen.
from the mouth of our sage, and it's from Psalms. So I just wanted to say that.
Amen.
We learn from everyone, and I personally learn from everyone. If it can be from any religion, and it can be from Buddhism, it can be from Orthodox sages.
Ben Zoma, no one said it better than Ben Zoma. 100%.
Except he said man, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, he was left with the limitations of his language. Ben.
Right.
Yeah, we haven't done Kaplan yet, right?
No, we will.
Okay, all right. I kind of wish we had gotten there first, because Wein seems to be dealing maybe with the limited theology, perhaps. So I don't know. So that's one point. I'm really impressed.
Kaplan, I just want to distinguish Kaplan from Wein, as in my non-scholarly best rabbinic way of understanding that. For Kaplan, Judaism is larger than the theology. Theology,
but it doesn't exclude it.
No, it's not excluded. It's one component to Judaism, but it's a fatal flaw for Wein.
Right. So I just want to say I am impressed by the degree to which people want to hang on to Judaism. That you could just feel it, right? That there's there was, even if there's huge parts of it that they reject, they don't want to let go.
Yeah, they don't want to.
And I think that that's my sort of optimistic view of our tradition, is that there's a stickiness to it that's really hard for people to let go of, even if theologically, ideologically, philosophically, they are completely at odds with the Judaism that they've inherited.
Right. One option is I feel like I don't have integrity in this pulpit as a rabbi, as a the move might be to just leave Judaism, not start a new Judaism, which is your point. I'm going to go back to the clip here, and let's pick up with where we left off. Oops, I didn't want to do that.
Jewish people. That is, if you look at Jewish history over the last 2,000 years, the last conclusion you would come to, very, very dramatic way, exemplifies that message. So, the humanism of the Jewish people doesn't come from the articulated philosophy. It comes from the experience. And to me, in some ways, that's more powerful.
Then how would you characterize the early Jewish writings, the prophets writing about justice and equality before the law?
Well, I think we have to make a distinction. It's very important so that we don't become too possessive. I recognize that the ethical values that are in humanistic Judaism are also to be found in other Judaisms. There is a distinction between humanism and humanitarianism. The prophets of the ancient Jewish world were humanitarian. And those values are very important, and we wish to preserve them in humanistic Judaism. But they weren't humanists. They perceived that the power for solving the problems of life didn't come necessarily from within themselves, but from some divine or supernatural source. So we share with other Jews humanitarian values, which we seek to preserve. What is unique and special about our message is that we see that the power to realize those values has to come from us, and the responsibility has to come from us as human beings.
What do you see?
All right, so that a little bit to finish that thought there. And then I want to answer, before I take some more questions, I want to go, and I see Susan, you still, oh, good, you have your hand down. Thank you, Susan. Susan, I will go to you when I need to go to you, rest assured. And thank you. I want to show a clip that addresses Ben's question exactly. So we have this idea, I don't know about his humanistic versus humanism. I don't know about that. I think humanistic implies a communitarian value. I think it's what he's saying. And humanism implies sort of individuality. Yeah, go Susan. You can, yeah.
I can very briefly.
Yeah.
I think among most people in the humanistic Jewish movement, including Sherwin Wine, there are not Jewish values. I mean, they just say, you know, there's ethics. And in fact, ethical culture society was formed long before humanistic Judaism, and it's basically the same thing.
So he's asked that question. I fast forwarded through that, and
Yeah.
he talked about Felix Adler, who was a Jew who created ethical culture, but did it stripping it bare of any Jewish affiliation or affinity or relationship. So here's the question, the direct question to Ben's question, which is,
so it will take us time to develop the kinds of visibility so that many, many Jews will be aware
does humanistic
of this
community
opportunity.
Judaism look like?
How does a humanistic Judaism community operate? What do humanistic Jews do? What do they celebrate? How do they become a community?
A humanistic Jewish community has, I think, three primary purposes. First, it is very concerned to give expression to humanistic ethical values. So that community is concerned about the quality of personal relations within the community, about the happiness and unhappiness of its members on a personal level. I mean, there's that real concern, and how it deals with important ethical issues out there in the community. So it's an ethically aware and ethically active community. The second, it's vitally concerned with the reinforcement of Jewish identity, enabling people to use the rich resources of the Jewish past and the Jewish experience to give expression to those ethical values. So it spends a lot of time reinforcing that Jewish identity. It may be celebrating holidays. It certainly engages in very extensive educational programs. One of the most important things that humanistic Jews have to do is to become the masters of the real history of the Jewish people. And the third, and very important, it provides a community. It's a support group. Do you have a problem? Are you needy? Has some terrible thing happened in your life and you need somebody as a friend and as a support? It functions as a supportive community. Supportive community, intensifying Jewish identity and acting on ethical values, put them all together, you have a humanistic Jewish community.
Okay, Ben, you like that answer?
No.
What? Tell me why not.
Well, this is where it falls down for me, because I think number two really is what this is about. I think what this is really is about is preserving Jewish identity. Why should these three things have to go together? Why should ethics and Jewish identity and community, why should they have to go together? People seem to have no problem maintaining a Jewish identity without any Judaism whatsoever, right? We found that. There are tons of people out there who identify as Jews and have done so now, maybe even over a couple of generations, without any real connection to Judaism.
So if I hear you, your point is that this movement is of a time and place.
No, I think this is still important to people. And you know, all you have to do, and this has been for now multiple generations, certainly in the Jewish philanthropic world, right? It's about holding on to Jews. It's about keeping the Jews we have and making more of them. And that means we have to keep people together. We have to keep them together in the same community, right?
But the world is bleak. He just told us the world. Did I cut that part? He told us how bleak the world is. Why? I mean, why? You know, who cares?
Why do we? If there is no divine imperative, right? If there's nothing beyond us that is tying us together, or is allowing us to focus on something outside our own problems, then why should we have any better way of being ethical or preserving community than anybody else? Why are we struggling to keep this thing together when there are lots of other ethical communities, right? There are.
The argument Rabbi Ain will say is it enables him to be ethical. It gives a way that is personally significant and a connection to history and background that can be a spur to them to leave an ethical life. That
well,
might
I think
be
it gives
great,
them a
that
way
might
to
be greater without that connection.
I think it gives them a way to be a Jew. That's, to me, that's more compelling. Why is Jewish identity important?
Yeah, so the theology is a red herring.
Well, why should Jewish identity be a major plank in this platform? Why does it matter? I don't, right? Everything else I get. I understand why being humanistic is important. I understand why being ethical is important. I understand why community is important, but he assumes a priori that Jewish identity is important. And why?
Hope.
So a couple of questions, and to pick up on what Ben is saying, at some point, if we could pick up on Wein's comment about a world governed by providence, I'd be interested in that. And then the second point is, how can
He doesn't think it is.
Oh, I thought he said it was. Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. Good. So
That's all right.
Okay. Second point is, how can it be Jewish if Judaism is formed by the precepts of the Torah, by the commandments? If you don't believe in all about that, if you carve that out, how can you call an organization Jewish?
Well, so he's asked that question point blank. It's the next question up, and I was going to skip it because it was so obvious. The answer is, when someone's born a Jew, you don't to a Jewish mother, you don't ask them what they believe. They're Jewish. There's never been a belief prerequisite for who is or who is not a Jew. That's the way he answers it.
But what I'm saying is not how can you call yourself Jewish, but how can you call this whole movement Jewish? Picking up on what Ben is saying.
Yeah.
Everything he's talking about, I think, can be fit into any other construct.
So here, I think, Hope, I think maybe you pinned it. I think you might have pinned the tail on the donkey here. And it goes to the heart of something that I struggle with as a rabbi, which is, as Jews, we're very comfortable in terms of theology with one or fewer gods. But if I were to say, what does a messianic shul look like? He would answer in the same way. Now, theology would be radically different, and we would all agree that theology would be beyond the pale, because for whatever, maybe we wouldn't all agree on that. Okay, well, we can do Jesus next week. But there is, I think, there is an acceptance, and it has always been an acceptance to the doubt that Marv speaks to. And that this certitude of Judaism never being a prerequisite for being in the movement. Susan, or being in the people. Susan.
Yeah, I think that it's really great that there are many alternatives for Jews to be able to celebrate holidays or do Shabbat. I mean, I wouldn't even do Shabbat if I had to say the traditional prayers over the candle. I just wouldn't do it. But I can do it. I can gather with my family, do Shabbat. We have Friday night Shabbat. We sing Shabbat Shalom. We sing another song about blessing each other, but it's not the same. I mean, it's offering this creative, and there's nobody more creative than Sherwin Wine are the rabbis. I mean, I'm reading Talmud every day. I read Daf Yomi. They're creative, tremendously creative. Our tradition is creative.
Full of innovation. Amen. Has always
constantly
been. That's correct.
Yeah.
Let me go now, because I think so. Susan and Hope, you guys are really around this issue, and he's pretty much asked this question, which is, I think, very much on point here, which is, where is the authority? Where is the authority here?
To a positive question. Where is the power? If your answer is the power and responsibility lie in human beings, then you're a humanistic Jew. You may or may not believe that there was some force out there that helped to make the universe. You may believe that there's some kind of goodness or love existing elsewhere in the universe, whatever it be. If you affirm that the power, the fundamental power, lies within us as human beings, and you're interested in Jewish culture and civilization and want to connect the two, then you are a humanistic Jew.
Rabbi, one criticism of humanism in general is that it supports an anything-goes morality. Where do we go for values without God? Where's the authority? Where's the check to keep society in line?
Well, the question of authority is very important. By the way, believing in God is also anything goes. Anybody can stand up and say, "Thus saith the Lord, God told me." Think of all the people in our society who commit terrible acts, and if you ask them why they did it, they say, "God told me to do it," right? So, in fact, God is dangerous because it gives people authority who are indeed dangerous, and we've seen that throughout history. So what is the check? If the authority simply lies in the internal conviction of the individual that he is the mouth of God, that's very dangerous. That's anything goes. What's the check? Well, the check for us is that right and wrong are not a function simply of the internal conviction of the person. Right and wrong are a function of the consequences of behavior that can be observed by more than one person. So, why should I keep promises? Is it because my ancestors said you should? Or because God said you should? No. The reason I should keep promises, the reason why I should be trustworthy is that if in a group or a community or a society, people stop keeping promises and all trust breaks down, that community cannot function. So the authority of right and wrong lies in the observed consequences of behavior, and almost all human cultures, do you understand, looking at that behavior, have come to similar conclusions.
Rabbi?
Okay, there's a lot there. Yeah, look at that exhale from Ben Chin. Yeah, Ben, you didn't love that answer.
Well, I mean, getting back to what he said before about the prophets, I don't get that the idea is that God is going to come and save us. I mean, the prophets are all about how we have to change our behavior. That's their whole deal, right? Is that we can't sit around and wait for God to solve our problems. That we actually have to radically change how we behave and operate as human beings.
But,
Now, of
but
course,
authority matters more to Rabbi Wein than anything else. And it's clear as day where the authority comes from for this. He can't walk into a shul and pray if we're under this notion that the authority is from some supernatural entity. Just he can't get.
Well, I like what he says about the danger of placing authority directly with God. I think that's a really good point that he makes. But we don't have that kind of we don't have that kind of religion, right? We don't have the kind of religion where we feel that we have a completely, unmediated.
Some do.
Well, okay, some do, but I don't think that's a mainstream sort of Judaism, right? We've got a relationship with God that is heavily mediated by Torah and by tradition and practice and law, right?
But here's my epistemological. Let me interrupt you and give you my epistemological question, which I'd love your help answering. I guess this is a critique. The critique is he goes very vocally, very strong. The authority is with us. And I think he means you, but maybe Susan can correct me. The authority is with you. It's about your integrity, and it's about living a life of authority. And it's not willy-nilly, whatever you choose, because you have to acknowledge, he called the observed consequences of behavior. We have to acknowledge how behavior impacts society. And without that, in fact, he has this little spiel going forward about sociopaths, which he gets into coming up here.
Oh.
We won't have time for, in which he says, if you can't perceive other people, if you can't understand observed consequences of behavior, then you can't be a humanist, he says quite clearly. So my critique, I guess, is his denial that there's an external source of authority, and then his affirmation that the authority is external.
Well, I don't know. This is what I wish he would say. I wish he would say, we have in Judaism something beautiful and unique and valuable in ways that we cannot explain. And I want to find a way for us to hang on to it, even though our faith in God has been shattered.
But Susan doesn't come to that shul. And a lot of people don't go to that shul. And I think what we're talking about here is maybe Rabbi Wein, Olav Shalom, wasn't creating a movement. Maybe he was creating if I say a brand, that's a movement, but maybe he was just opening up another avenue, another mode of communication to speak to people who, what you say sounds very nice, but because of their lived experience, they're not going to respond to. Okay, now I've spoken enough for Susan. She can speak for herself.
Well, I think that it's really important to know that his degrees are in philosophy, and this is pure Kant as far as I know. He's talking about moral imperative.
Yes,
he looks at morality as a Western philosopher, and he does have a little fatal flaw, which is that because of his generation, he was exactly the age of my mother. His generation, he reacted to rabbinic literature in a negative way. And I think that as the humanistic Judaism movement continues, and a number of people who've been trained to be humanistic rabbis have embraced rabbinic literature in a different way.
So wait. Can I stop you? Can I stop you right there?
Sure.
Then that isn't humanistic Judaism as Rabbi Wein is explaining it, because so much of what Rabbi Wein is trying to accomplish is to alleviate that pain, that misteaching, that bad teaching that your mother had, or that relationship of that generation that your mother had to those texts, which is why.
Yeah, he reacted, he definitely had, I mean, the Torah at Birmingham Temple it sits on a shelf with other books. It's not considered more important than any other book.
Is there an
And
ark? Is there an ark in the temple?
no ark and no ark. So there are, I mean, I can't speak for everyone. I can speak only for myself, which is one reason I didn't want to teach the humanistic Judaism point of view, because I think that I'm more post-denominational.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Sherwin Wine and that movement, because
Yeah.
for some people, it's really important to practice the way people practice in humanistic congregations. And in fact, it's no different philosophically from Mordechai Kaplan, except for one thing, which is that Mordechai Kaplan believed in prayer as folk custom, and Sherwin Wine did not.
Oh, that's
Because
interesting.
that's the only difference. They were friends. They knew each
Well,
other.
maybe we'll go in, maybe we'll
Yeah.
look into that in the
Yeah.
coming sessions. I want to pause. So Don and Marv, hold your point because there are 2 minutes left. And I had about 50 pages of Rabbi Wine's material, which none of which we'll get to, but we'll get to the last 2, which is the summation of the movement. And then I'll go to Don and Marv. Humanistic Judaism. This is the end of his book, the last 2 pages. Consistency is not the hobgoblin of little minds. No, it's foolish consistency is the quote. So, okay, whatever. I'm just having fun there. Consistency is not the hobgoblin of little minds. It is the sign of integrity and the friend of personal dignity. See, look at that, Marv, right up front. Ambivalence is charming when we are detached observers of the universe. It is less charming when it persuades us to postpone decisions that need to be made, and it is graceless when it becomes the foundation of a philosophy of life. Ambivalent feelings are unavoidable. Without absolute certainty, it is only sensible to find value on both sides of an issue. But ambivalent behavior is something different. It seeks to pursue 2 incompatible goals simultaneously. Obedience to God and personal autonomy become a single project. Religious tradition and science find reconciliation. Individual freedom and tribal segregation go hand in hand. Humanistic Jews are tired of being timid. They are tired of mergers that don't work. Well, that's on point. They are fed up with using the theological language of their enemies and never saying clearly what they feel or think. They find no virtue in ambivalence. There is a need in the Jewish world to take secular revolution seriously and to provide a clear alternative to rabbinic Judaism. The ambivalence do neither tradition nor humanism well because they are trying to do both. The next page is upside down. I think I have to fix that, right? Hold on one second. I think I'll have to turn it upside down here.
Command R.
Command R. Thank you. That's I see. That's that. That's very helpful. Humanistic Jews want to bring their beliefs and their behavior together and to find their integrity. They are eager to affirm. Here are their affirmations: that they are disciples of the secular revolution, that the secular revolution was good for the Jews, that reason is the best method for the discovery of truth, that morality derives from human needs and is the defense of human dignity, that the universe is indifferent to the desires and aspirations of human beings, that people must ultimately rely on people, that Jewish history is a testimony to the absence of God, and the necessity of human self-esteem, that Jewish identity is valuable because it connects them to that history, that Jewish personality flows from that history and not from the official texts that seek to describe it. That's a good point. That Jewish identity serves individual dignity and not the reverse. That the Jewish people is an international family that has its center in Israel and its roots in the diaspora. That the humanistic Gentile has a positive role to play in the life of the Jewish people. Humanistic Jews want to translate these affirmations and commitments into an effective lifestyle for themselves and for those who share their convictions. They need a community of believers to work with and to share with in this pioneering venture. They also need a cadre of trained leaders and spokespeople to provide scholarship and guidance along the way. Having read this book, you may have discovered that you are a humanistic Jew. If so, now is the time to test your integrity. Okay, Don, and then Marv,
Yeah.
Susan. Yeah.
I like more than seeing him talk. I like reading him better. I like that a lot better.
Sorry, I could have focused on one and not the other. I apologize. But he was answering all of your questions, so I never could get to the text.
I like the guy. But he refers to the external source of authority that he's against. So, but there may be an inner source of authority. Maybe God is not out there doing things. Maybe God is the inner source of authority. You could call it conscience, maybe that word. And therefore, when he says, you look at the outcome of what you're going to do for your ethics. And I'm going to say that when we go in to find that, we are touching God, or what I'm going to call God, that isn't a mental construct, that is coming from the deep place. And so it's just, once you put God out there, no more, how can you argue? God's out there, but maybe God's inside. And all ethics, I don't think ethics come from the cognitive mind. They come from, we just say it comes from the heart. Your conscience comes from the heart. And God, and the 10 Commandments are in the heart. God is in the heart. You know, it's funny how I like the guy, but he pisses me off. I mean,
it's a good, he's doing his job as a rabbi then.
I mean, yeah, I just have a hard time with Jews
who
are against God. I was raised with that, with a bunch of Jews in my family. None of them were into God. I'd mention God. They thought I was crazy. And I never could understand. All my life, I couldn't understand. They go to temple, and I'd say to my grandfather, you go to temple and you pray to God, don't you? So I'd go there sometimes with him. But he didn't believe in God. I never understood how
I relate to that. I relate to that personally. My experience is very similar. That's, I think, led me to do what I do. He addresses you right here, Don. No redefining the word God will change the reality we now perceive. The world that reason has revealed to us may give us more anxiety than we want, or it may fill us with the pleasant anticipation of new adventure and opportunity, but its new face cannot easily be denied. He will not accept your redefinition of God as being in the heart. He just doesn't think that will do. Okay, Marv, and then Susan. I'm going to give Susan, Susan, I'm going to give you the final word. So Marv, Hope, and then Susan.
Placing authority in human hands has been very disappointing to mankind. And
he would argue placing authority in a God that none of us can verify is dangerous.
Well, I think that's why so many people have looked beyond authority in humans and looked to another source, just for hope, not that source is provable.
But just as an aspiration. Amen. That's right. And I think that Soloveitchik, the great Orthodox rabbi of the 20th century, that's halachic man, is sort of his ideal, sort of aspirational Jew. Hope.
So sort of quick 3 points. Consequences. Some really bad guys have been really successful. So I don't think you can say ethics comes from human experience. I'd be really curious to know what occurred in his life to trigger his renunciation of classical Judaism. Third, my impression is you can consider yourself a religious Jew if you consider the possibility of God. The doors are open to sort of borrow from something. Is that fair?
I used to have on my website that I ran in Brooklyn, I used to say Rabbi Dan is open to all of those who are, Rabbi Dan seeks to reach all those who are open to being reached. And that is the way that so that's right. That's how I express. Are you, if you're not open to being reached, then why am I bothering at this point? But if the door is slightly ajar, as Susan's was, and then Rabbi Wine made larger, that's beautiful. Susan, I want to give you the last word.
Well, Sherwin Wine in his defense, he called love, love. He didn't call it God. He called the heart, heart. I mean, you don't have to substitute the word God for all these other things. And where I separate myself from him and where I'm moving forward is with the idea of archetypes and Jungian, like it was his generation, and and you asked what made him the way he is. He was gay. He was never accepted. He was treated like dirt by the rabbinic central group in Michigan. He was horribly treated. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with it as well. But I think it's partly just his interest in philosophy combined with his incredible suffering from being a gay man at a time when it was not accepted. So, that would explain him. But I'm really interested in exploring living a life that's both rational and that using both sides of the brain and God as metaphor. I'm really comfortable with that. But at the same time, I really believe that it's important to have congregations for people who get crazy when they hear the word God. That was transitional for me. And it's important for a lot of people who would not have anything to do with being Jewish other than eating a pastrami sandwich, so.
Thank you.
And thank you for doing this.
No, this was a lot of fun. This was a good one. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing so many of your stories and your personal impressions and, deepening our study of Rabbi Wein. And I think it is a powerful thing. I mean, I don't want to, maybe it is a traditional, transitional, maybe it is a type of kiruv that he is creating to people in a very powerful way. So I just want to close with that. Thank you to everyone. And I wish you all a great rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So long.